Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Find Your Free, the podcast. I am your hostess, Rachel Voss, and this is episode 8. So let's get started. This episode is dedicated to the entrepreneurs, the creatives, and generally anyone who has a passion in their heart that they are working to live out loud in this world. And it was inspired by a yoga student who reached out to me earlier this week to share with me that she had been listening to my podcast and found the messaging inspiring. Thank you so much. But that she had also been feeling a little stuck in her business and the work that she is building, and asked if I had any guidance for her. So kind of thinking about her message and what I wanted to talk about this week, I thought it would be a good opportunity to jump into kind of the entrepreneurial side of my life and what the experience has been for me growing as an entrepreneur. And so it's like we're going to be talking about the business side of things without really getting into like the business side of things, right? So what does that mean? That means talking more about the heart of business, talking about more of like the spiritual side, if you would, of like entrepreneurship. So it won't be so much about how you can maximize your profit, in the next 30 days and things like that, how to increase your profit margin and stuff like that. We're not going to get into that today. That will be down the line stuff. And certainly as I grow this podcast, I do hope, plan, vision, bringing other people in who can really provide just great tips, tools, insight that can help you if you are building a business, growing a business, in the process of thinking about a business. So information that will be helpful. I definitely plan, hope, and like I said, vision or envision people coming on who can provide you some support in those areas. But really, where entrepreneurship begins is with the heart, in the heart, with your vision, right? What is it that is in your heart that you want to share with the world? And so maybe it's not even a business, but maybe it's just a passion that you have. Like I remember, wow, this just popped into my mind, but there was a coworker I used to work with many moons ago. And she would invite some of us over from time to time for like brunches and lunches at her house. And she would always like set up the table, like just the setting would just be beautiful. Just all these little, just what's my word, accoutrement. She would just add all these little fun features, napkins, just little things that she would do to set the table up. That was just like, oh man, like, why are you in like communications? Like, why don't you do like interior decorating? And I always remember she said to me, I love doing this for myself. I cannot imagine having to do this for other people because I would want to execute the vision the way I see it. And, when you take on clients, you have to execute the way they see it. And I've heard that a lot with just a lot of different creatives that I've met, right? And that's something that has to be honored. There may be a deeper conversation of like, okay, well, are you using that as an excuse to not really get out there and put your passion out into the world? Or maybe you really feel that way. Like, no, I love to do something for myself. I love to do this for my friends, maybe my family, but not something I'm looking to like build a business out of or even have a career, with. So maybe it's not even about building a business, but it's just about tapping into your passion or at least acting, on that passion that you may have. So for me, I've shared certainly in the first episode when I introduced myself to the world as a podcaster, I talked about the journey of how I got here, right? How I landed in the space of having my own podcast. And a lot of it was just figuring out my way and following my heart of wanting to be of service to others. So I was not groomed, trained by any means to be an entrepreneur. Like that word outside of talking about others or whatever the case may be was like not a part of my vocabulary as far as like my life and my career were concerned. I was very much groomed and trained, if you would, to go to school, to go to college, to get a degree, to get a job. And so I did that. I got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Temple, shout out to the Owls. And I got a master's in public administration from the American University in Washington, D.C. And after completing my master's, I just sort of landed, I will say serendipitously, shout out to my brother Claude, who I'm in DC, he's in New York in the housing world. And, he's at an event and put my name out there with some folks that he met that were from DC and were in the housing world. And, he said, hey, my sister just graduated. She got her master's. They're like, oh, we're looking for somebody who just got their master's, and connected me, and boom. A couple of months later, I landed my first job out of grad school. So again, shout out to you, Claude, for hooking that up. And from there, I just sort of landed in the housing finance world and had a career that I guess was, what was that, 2000? So about 13 years total. 1 year I took off when I had my son, but 12, 13 years total in the housing finance world. And so I just landed in a job. I landed in an opportunity that allowed me to travel and learn something completely new. Like housing was not on my radar by any means, but it was something I could sink my teeth into, because being someone who had a service-based nature, and knowing that I wanted to be of service to others, and learning and understanding the importance of housing and community development, and how affordable housing is like a service to the world, I was able to sink my teeth into this experience and just, learn everything I could. And so from there, I was at this one agency for about 2 years. And then from there, I moved into the agency, the organization that I would ultimately retire myself from by way of entrepreneurship. And so this company that I went to, I learned so much. I started off as a policy analyst in the lobbying world. I moved into the meetings and convention side of things. And then ultimately I landed in training and development. So running training and development programs within the housing finance industry. And again, great experience, great opportunities, lots of travel, met lots of great people, have great friends from that experience, but my heart just wasn't in it. And so I knew creatives, I met creatives along the way, and I would always feel like, man, like, why don't I have that, right? Like, why am I not this like creative person? Like, I started off my career path wanting the fancy suits and the fancy job. And then somewhere along the way, for me, it started to feel like stuffy. And so as I met people who were more in an arts kind of world, like not even necessarily just drawing, but like curating spaces and just doing different things that were outside of, for me, the box of creativity, because I would have thought, it's just drawing or singing or something that is sort of tangible. But I started to meet, all these different creatives doing all these different things, yoga teachers, things like that. And it was like, oh man, like I just want to be free, in that way. Like I want to be moving with a certain energy. I want to have control, like over my schedule. But there was still never this thought of like, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to have my own business. Yoga comes into my life within that space. That certainly fed into the creative world that I was, starting to get more and more exposed to. And it ultimately just came to a point 2 years after I started teaching yoga where my passion in my heart and what I was feeling on the inside came at direct odds with this life I was trying to fit myself into. And there were just a series of different events that happened, new management, scheduling changes, not having as much work life, flexibility and balance. And it just started to tell me like this path, that you're on is not the direction that you want to go in. Like, where do you see yourself going in 10 years? And it's not like, I'd gotten to this point where it wasn't like I wanted to be like a vice president or an SVP or, whatever. Like it sounded sexy on paper and all of that, but I was just like, I don't even know what I want to be an SVP of. Like, I just want to help people. And so when things kind of came to a head on the corporate side of things, as far as shifting and changing, and certainly looking back, that was the universe talking to me. I always feel if I had stayed 5 or 10 minutes longer, those shifts would have started to become more and more uncomfortable, because that's usually how it works. When you know in your heart that you're not on the right path, or there's like a different path out there and you're forcing yourself to move this other way, the universe will speak to you, and it usually starts quietly, and then it gets a little bit louder and a little bit louder and a little bit louder, and it can show up physically in your body, stress, things like that. I was definitely one of those people who on like Sunday night at like 5 o'clock, stomach would start to hurt. I'd get like internally anxious, just the idea of like having to get up and go to work the next day. And it's not like I was miserable with my job. Very fortunate in that way, because I know people who are like physically miserable with their job. It wasn't that. It was more that I was just miserable with this concept, this idea of like living this life that didn't feel authentic to me. And so that's how the universe will speak to you: the stomach aches, the headaches, the anxiety attacks, And so I always felt if I had stayed, at that job a little bit longer, the conversation from the universe would have gotten a lot louder. But certainly looking back, the shifts that were already taking place that I ultimately responded to was making my life uncomfortable, because it was, the spiritual side of things was starting to shake up my life. Like, okay, let's do this. Let's start to get on the path that is more aligned with who you are. And so when things came to a head in the corporate world, and that is in direct opposition with how I'm growing as a yoga teacher, what I'm learning spiritually, how I'm growing personally, it was like, this yoga world is where it's at. This corporate world pays the bills and helps me take care of my kid, because I was very much a single mom at the time. And it was just like, what do I do? And I shared in the first episode, and I'll share here again, that my yoga teacher gifted to me just a few months before I ultimately made the decision to make the leap of leaving the corporate world. My yoga teacher had gifted me a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And it's a book for all creatives who just are struggling with blocks, who are trying to figure out the creative path. Like, it's a short book, not super long, but just the kick in the ass that you need to kind of get yourself moving, or at least get yourself from A to B, or even figuring out what A is, right? And so I'm reading this book coming back from a work trip, and I'm on a plane from San Diego coming back to Maryland, and pulled out that book on that plane ride. And like within an hour, I was like, oh shit, like, this is going to happen. Like, I'm going to quit my job. I'm just going to quit. Like, it's time to just live life on my terms. And so the feeling was so palpable. It was like, I'm on this 5-hour flight. It felt like restrictive to be on the flight. Like, I just wanted to get off the flight. I wanted to call somebody. I wanted to talk about, this, what had come up for me, spiritually. It was a feeling that I felt it in the pit of my stomach. I felt it in my heart. And the more I felt it, it was like my palms got sweaty. It was like all those feelings when your body tells you, like, yes, you are on to something here. And so when I did get off the plane, I called my yoga teacher and like 2 other people, 2 other confidants. And I was like, this is what I'm thinking. And I will always remember my yoga teacher saying, it was never a matter of if you would leave. It was a matter of when. And I'm so glad that you found your when, And so I had like a day between when I got back from that work trip and when I would go back to the office. And in that day between, I thought about it. And at first I was like, all right, I'll think about it for 30 days. Then I was like, all right, I'll think about it for 15 days. Okay, I'll think about it for a week. And then it was just like, no, like, this is it. Like, this is your moment. And here's the thing. I never thought I would be somebody that would have the moment of quitting a corporate job. Like, I was so trained to, go to school and get a job that coloring outside of those lines like freaked me out. But the more it freaked me out, it was like, I have to do this. What was I 6 years ago? So I was 37, 36, 37 at the time. And it was like, you gotta take this chance now, because if you wait 10, 15, 20 years, like, you might not have those opportunities, or you just, like, do it now. Like, now is the time. And yes, I'm running through my head, like, you have this kid you have to take care of. You have a great salary, but you're still living pretty much check to check. Like, what are you going to do? And it was just like, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to trust. And so by time that day ended, that day off between coming back from my work trip and actually going back to the office, I had my letter of resignation drafted. And I was really proud of myself, because as an only daughter, as a baby sister, I tend to look for validation a lot, and certainly from my family, like validation, like approval. And when it has come to, certain decisions in my life, it was like I'd go to so many people and say, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And I take all these different responses and would struggle with kind of finding my own answer, because I was concerned with what everybody else thought. But with this decision, I knew deep in my heart, like, I cannot share this with everybody, because somebody's going to talk me off the ledge, and rightfully so, coming from the perspective of, Rachel, you have a kid that you have to take care of. But I can't let those thoughts get in my mind. Like, I have to trust what I'm feeling right now. I have to trust my heart. And so I walked in the next day, and my office mate, who has turned into a dear friend, Amber, if by chance you are listening to this, hey girl, hey. But I shared an office space with Amber, and Amber and I, you know how it is when you work in that corporate world or wherever you work, when you share space with somebody 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, like, if you get along with that person, you're going to share your life. And, so Amber and I shared a lot of things with each other. But this day I came in, I was like, I can't even tell Amber. Like, I just got to do this. I felt so bad. And I was a little more nervous about not telling Amber than like about what I was going to do. And so I set up a meeting, with the SVP that I reported to at the time. And I'm like, hey, can I drop in for a little bit? And he's like, yeah. And my heart was leaping out of my chest the whole way to his office. And I marched in didn't march in, but I walked in, and, he's like, what's up? And I'm like, well, the time has come for me to move on. And it was a shock for them. I don't think they saw it coming. And then when I was asked, like, well, what are you going to do? Because it wasn't like I was going to some other company. I was like, I am going to pursue my yoga career. And I remember the initial look, like, you're going to go teach yoga? And folks had known that I was doing teacher training and that I was teaching here and there, but nobody had an idea of like how much it was for me, right? And so there was certainly this look of confusion, like, what are you going to do with that? But then it came to understanding, and we ended up having a great conversation. And I had the good fortune of being asked to stay on for a couple more months to be able to transition my projects and things that I was working on. And so to stay on for a couple more months, moving into like a part-time role was a nice way for me to transition from the corporate world to being on my own, because I was already taking this gigantic leap with no real plan and no real money. So having that time to transition helped me bridge the gap to make the landing a little bit softer. So I did that. And my last official day in the corporate world was April 30th, 2015. And I say my day of liberation, when Rachel Voss Yoga was truly born, was May 1st, 2015. That was the day I officially stepped out on my own. And I remember waking up that day like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? So here's the deal, lovelies. I say this ad nauseum. I did not have a plan. Being an entrepreneur was not something that I envisioned. I thought it might be like a cool idea, but it wasn't really something I thought of for me. For me, it was always like, get the good job, get the promotion, get at a better company, get more money. Like, it was always that. It wasn't like have your own or step out on your own. It was like, no, keep progressing with the path that you're on. And so not having this guidance, not having a plan, it was just like, okay, what am I going to do? I was only teaching one yoga class at the time. And so it was like, all right, well, we got to start teaching more classes. You've got to figure out how to find clients. You've got to do all of this. And so it took me some time to find my way, but eventually I just kind of started cold calling places and different studios and wellness places and just kind of offering my yoga services. And I will say those first couple of months, I definitely bumped around, took some opportunities that weren't like feel good opportunities, took some opportunities that, it cost me more time and effort than I got paid. But that was figuring it out and figuring out my way. The challenge for me, in all honesty and transparency, was because I really hadn't thought about being an entrepreneur, and because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and because I knew I didn't necessarily want to own a yoga studio, I wasn't sure how to, kind of frame what I was doing. So when people would say, especially my family, because ultimately I did tell my mom and my dad, and it was kind of like, okay, so what are you going to do? And it's like teaching yoga. And certainly it's like, are you going to make any money? How are you going to take care of yourself? All the questions that come with that. I think if I had been like, yeah, I'm planning to open a studio, this is my business plan, that would have been one thing. But it was just kind of like, I don't know. I just know I'm going to teach yoga and I'm going to figure it out. And so that's what I did those first, couple of months. Just again, took opportunities, teaching gigs that didn't pay enough or that, cost me more time and gas and effort than I actually got paid. But again, that's learning the ropes. But I kept following my heart. I kept just navigating the space. And ultimately, through following my heart, I connected with a place that it was a nonprofit foundation in Baltimore. Or is a nonprofit foundation in Baltimore that teaches yoga and mindfulness to kids in some of the West Baltimore communities. And they taught in schools and community centers and things like that. And I read about them in like Yoga Journal, and I was so moved by what they did because it had that community aspect plus the combination of yoga. With the housing world, I was still very interested in the idea of community development. So the fact that this company or this organization was like ingrained in the community, but then ingrained in it from a yoga perspective, I was like, oh man, this is cool. And so I actually reached out to volunteer. Again, just moving from the heart. I just said, hey, I read about you guys. I'm a yoga teacher in the area. Like, I know you teach in schools and stuff like that. Like, if you're looking to add to your roster, would love to meet with you. And so they called me in, and the day that I came in to talk about volunteering, I left with the offer of a part-time job. They needed some assistance in their office. It was 3 dudes and they needed some female energy in there. And it was just a good vibe. And I ended up getting about 20, 25 hours a week of work that was aligned with what I was doing. It gave me some income to keep going, and it helped to stop some of the bleeding, frankly, that was happening in terms of, trying to keep up financially, but not having that steady income I had from my career. And so when I look back on it, I know for sure that trusting my heart, trusting the universe, even though I didn't have the plan and it was fucking scary, I always landed. And that will happen when you're on the path, and I say the path generally, whether it's for entrepreneurship, just putting out your passion out there, even if it's just for yourself or for your closest friends, like really embarking on the path of living a life that is most authentic to you. Like, when you embark on that path, even when it feels like your back is against the wall or you're hitting like rock bottom moments, like even if you feel like that, a way will be made, a light will shine. It'll be maybe just a kind word. It'll be money that comes out of nowhere. It'll be an opportunity of, hey, I was offering to volunteer and instead you offered me a part-time job. And because I was moving from the heart, I believe that's why I was rewarded that way. And what was super, super trippy about this whole thing was that 2 years prior to finding out about this place again, just randomly reading about them in Yoga Journal. 2 years prior, when I had just become a yoga teacher, I was at a retreat that my yoga teacher held, and one of the sessions was a vision boarding session. So, with vision boards, you cut out magazine pictures and all these different things. And at the time, I had cut out a magazine picture of, it was like a young Black boy who was meditating. And I put it on my vision board to represent what I wanted for my son, like him meditating and, having that practice in his life and all of that. And I put that picture on my vision board. So you fast forward 2 years later, I'm, now working with this organization. And the day that I came in for like my first, full day of work, if you would, I'm just kind of looking around the office, getting familiar. And I saw framed on the wall that very same picture of the little boy that I had cut out 2 years ago from a magazine and put on my vision board. So I'm like, hey, you have this picture too? And they're like, that's an original picture. That's one of our kids that we teach yoga to in one of the local schools. And it was like, holy shit. It was my first moment of like a vision board coming to life, and it didn't come into life by way of like directly my son meditating. I wish he would meditate more, but it manifested in a way I would have never thought. But to see that picture on the wall and know that that picture was on my vision board, that was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely where I'm supposed to be. And so having that part-time job, again, just helped me have a little bit more of a footing so that I could continue to do my yoga work. And again, the part-time job was in the same field, so I wasn't, even though I wasn't completely independent, I was now creating life on my own terms, picking a job, picking an opportunity that is aligned with what I want to do instead of just trying to force myself into this job just to get a paycheck. And so over the years, I, continued to refine what it is that I wanted to do. Always clear that I want a yoga studio, but now understanding like, hey, I want to lead retreats. I want to hold spaces. I got refined, or, I sort of refined my market. And I talked about this in the first episode of like, hey, I want to teach yoga to everybody, to beginning to notice like, hey, it's women who are primarily coming. It's women who seem to primarily resonate with my message. It's women in this particular age group, and just starting to put that together so I could create programs and opportunities that would be tailored to the people who were responding to me. And so you start to figure that out. And then ultimately I established an LLC, and I got clear, like Find Your Free is like my messaging and all of that. And then starts to come the flow of like, you start to see what other people are doing. And not that I wanted to copycat, but just kind of like, you see podcasts growing, and you see folks who are not just teaching yoga, but holding space by way of podcasts, by writing books, by doing different things outside of just teaching yoga. Because I will say straight up and down, and I have no problem saying it, let me scale back. What I won't say is that it's impossible to make a living just off teaching yoga. Nothing is impossible. There are people who have had totally successful careers strictly from teaching yoga. I'm talking no other supplemental income, no workshops, no retreats, no nothing like that, just teaching yoga. However, it is a journey. It is a lot of work. And it can take some time before it becomes a sustainable model. And so I came in to this work thinking I just want to teach yoga, and quickly learn I can't teach. I don't want to teach. Not even I can't. I don't want to teach 25 classes a week. Like, I don't want to do that. And so eventually you find out, okay, you get private clients, you get corporate clients, and you can kind of charge a little bit more of a premium price per hour, and, get in 1 hour what you might get from like 3 classes, so you start to kind of figure all that stuff out. But what was becoming more and more clear to me was like, I don't just want to teach yoga. And so figuring that out started to give me clarity. Like, I want to write. I've always wanted to write. And I would use social media like Facebook and Instagram as a way to like, write captions, mini blogs, if you would, but just to kind of get my thoughts out. I had my own blog for a while. And so I'm like, no, I want to write. I would love to be a podcast guest. I wasn't thinking about being my own podcast, but I was just like, I love the idea of like getting on a mic and sitting in the space and having on the headphones. It was always something about the headphones that spoke to me. But overall, I was just starting to see like, okay, there's other things that I can do besides just teaching yoga, which I know I'm great at, which I will never stop doing. But there was something more. And so I was still figuring that out. And being able to see like, okay, there are different streams of income that I can have. There are different ways that I can still be the yoga teacher, but not physically like on the yoga mat, like leading a physical yoga practice. Being here, having this podcast is a form of yoga, sharing, giving back to the community, sharing insight. We take a meditative breath at the end of every session. So there are different ways to live out my yoga in terms of the work that I want to do. And so that began to shape itself between 2015 and where I am now in 2021. And so it took a lot of bumping around. It took a lot of figuring things out. But the one thing I always relied on and that I always share in any of these spaces, yoga spaces, workshops, retreats, whatever, is that I always followed my heart. I always followed my heart. And that's where it begins. Entrepreneurship, starting a business, living out your passion, starting to really bring your creativity out in the world starts with the vision, starts with what you feel in your heart. And then everything else you learn along the way, the budgeting, the profits, the mentorships, like all the things that come with being an entrepreneur, having a business, building something, all those things come, but it starts with the seed, the thought, what's in your heart. And so for me, I felt like, okay, I don't always know what I'm doing. I'm not exactly clear, what the ultimate vision is. I know what I want the home to look like that I want to live in. I know what I want my family structure to look like. I know that I want to live by water. I know those things, but in all honesty, like I'm still getting clear on like what the end game is, because coming back to the yoga studio example, it's just the best example I can give as a yoga teacher. It's not like, oh, I want to have a studio and be in my community and that's what I'm going to build and I'm going to leave the studio for my kids. Like, I want to do motivational speaking. I want to write a book. Like I said, I do want to do retreats. Like, I would love this brand, this message of Find Your Free to grow in so many ways that it's beyond brick and mortar yoga studio, if that makes sense. So I envision TED Talks. I, again, envision like book tours. I envision holding different spaces with different women from all over, just promoting healing, restoration, promoting that I see you, that I value you, promoting empowerment, helping other women who want to become entrepreneurs or who want to even give themselves permission to think about living life according to their own terms. I see all of that, but I'm not exactly sure what the end game is going to look like. I just continue to follow my heart, and it usually lands me where I need to be. And so, even with this podcast, for example, I started off like, oh, I just hope I hope that I become successful enough that somebody will have me on the radio to be their guest, or that somebody will find me to be a notable yoga teacher or what have you and invite me on their podcast to be a guest. And then towards the end of 2020, it was like, well, shit, I actually want to do my own podcast. I have something I want to say. I have things I want to share. I feel like I can hold space. And so now I'm doing that. And I got to tell you, I get asked more often than not, well, why the podcast? Where's it going to go? How are you going to make money? What do I get out of it? So, why? Why are you doing this? And so for the why, simply because I'm following my heart, because it's something that feels right. It feels therapeutic. It's not troublesome for me to do so. I'm blessed to have a mate who is a recording artist and has his own podcast. So all I have to do is literally jump on the mic and start talking. It's not like a big fuss. No, I'm not making any money, but I didn't get in, like, I wanted to be successful, yeah, but I was just like, I just want to follow my heart and do this. I just want to provide an offering to people who need a good word, who are looking for a podcast that will nourish their mind and their spirit, And so it just feels like the right thing to do. Sure, I see it as a foundation for the TED Talk that I envision, for the motivational speaking that I envision, for being a thought leader. Like, I see it as a foundation for that, but I'm just like, I'm just going to do it because it feels right to do. And, so it's challenging when you're following your heart. I will say that. And anybody who is on, again, the path, as I call it, anybody who's on the path of living life according to your terms knows that following your heart is not always what's the word? Like a favorable answer or like a meaty enough response to those who, I won't say are not on the path, but who may not color outside of the line so much, or who just may be a little bit more traditional, or whatever the case may be. So when you say I'm just following my heart to somebody that's got like their 3, 5, 10-year, corporate goals, it's like, well, where's that going to get you? What's that going to do? Again, in transparency, when I first stepped out there, like I said, my mom had a little bit of a tougher time of wrapping her mind around me being a yoga teacher. I actually thought it was going to be the other way around. I thought my dad was going to have a tough time and that my mom was going to be like, okay. But it was the other way around. My dad was like, okay, well, listen, it's about being happy. And as long as you're happy, I know you'll figure it out. My mom was more like, what are you going to do? How are you going to pay the bills? And at first I was very resistant to that. But then over time, I had to understand she's just being a mom. She's concerned about me. She's concerned about her grandson. Like, how are we going to make things happen? And I didn't have a clear answer. But in those first couple months, really those first couple of years, I struggled with trying to get, well, I felt like I was struggling with trying to get my family to really see what I was doing, or to at least just support me in a way that it didn't always feel like I was answering a bunch of questions and like I had to defend what I felt was true for me. I wasn't out on the street. My son was fine. We were okay. But there was just this constant like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And I was equally challenged because I had one brother who had gone the entrepreneurial route, having his own business and stuff like that. So my mom was familiar with that. And then I had another brother who was in the performing arts world. And it always seemed like there was like all this support for them. But then when it came to me, it was like, well, what the hell? And I just kind of felt like I wasn't getting that same love and support. And that was hard. That was hard. But at the same time, I had my yoga community. I had my yoga students. I had friends that were like, dude, this is awesome. Like, this is what you need to be doing. Like, keep going, keep going. And so I share that because for anybody who is, thinking outside the box, who's coloring outside of the lines, like, you most likely will. I venture to say the path of living your authentic life, it's almost like it's a rite of passage to run into people who you are super close to, your family, your friends, who will question you and make you feel like, what the fuck? You're totally like asinine for what you're thinking or what you're working on. And that is part of the journey, and it can be tough and it can be hard and it can feel like you are totally isolated. And if you listen to the last episode, and if you haven't, check out episode 7. It's really important to have tools and practices and people who will keep you grounded. To have your support team, to have your entourage, even if it's just one best friend, but having that yoga class you can go to, that yoga teacher who inspires you, that meditation practice that keeps you grounded, that park you like to go to that you can put your feet in the ground and feel rooted, the water that you like to sit next to that helps you clear your mind, like that. You're going to need all of that to support you in your journey, because it can feel like a very isolated journey sometimes. And it can get to a point where you have to tune out your family. You have to tune out your friends. You have to maybe, not to quiet down your passion, but have conversations and not get into that or shut it down or establish your boundaries. It is not a path that I say that's for the faint of heart because following your heart is the path. It is the work. It is trusting yourself. It's trusting your gut. It's trusting the universe. It's trusting signs and, all of those different things. But if you know the song in your heart that you want to sing, nobody can tell you that. Everybody has their own song. Everybody has their own mission, their own vision, their own passion. And sometimes you'll get naysayers who naysay because they never took that opportunity and they're, jealous or envious of you taking that or you doing that. Maybe it is a parent and it's having patience with them, knowing that they're just afraid of what could happen. But over time, hopefully, prayerfully, they come around like my family did. The day that my mom said, hey, I was looking at something on the news and they were talking about yoga for senior citizens, or hey, I noticed that there's this yoga class, or I found this article, and it just be these little things here and there where my mother would start talking about yoga with me before I started talking about it with her. And when I noticed that, I'm like, okay, she's getting there. It's just going to take some time. We come from a different generation than our parents and our loved ones and those we may have gone to for guidance at other points in our lives. And so when you're kind of doing something different, you know what I mean, breaking the pattern, if you would, it can be scary for them. It can be, just scary for them, for you. But again, when you have those practices that keep you grounded, when you have that sense of trusting yourself, that is what will carry you through those moments. And, they do say that the quote unquote, they do say that you may lose friends, you may lose relationships with family members. I have been blessed that hasn't been my experience as far as this entrepreneurial path is concerned. I've definitely had that in life as my personal development has happened. I've lost people that probably didn't need to be in my orbit in the first place. But I've been fortunate in this path of building Rachel Voss Yoga and this brand of Find Your Free that I haven't lost people because of their issue with what I'm doing with my life. But I have heard about it happening. It can happen. And just know it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with what you're doing. It's just that people have their stuff and, they project their stuff onto others. And so it's just about staying connected to what you feel in your heart. And so that's why I say, or that's why I said, this is an episode about the business of business, but without getting into technical business talk. You can know all the numbers and have all the things, but if you are kind of suffering on the inside of not being clear about your passion, if you don't really have maybe just an idea, a thought, an inkling of what it is you want to do, all the technical stuff to this entrepreneur, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but step one is the vision. Like I said, step one is the seed that's planted. Step one is what's in your heart and going from there. Now, once you are on a path, and certainly if it is a path of building a business and growing a business, seek out your teachers. Ask the questions. If, for example, it's a yoga business that you want to start, come to me, talk to me, listen to podcasts like this, other podcasts that where people share their insights, their experience. There's a lot of free information out there. Certainly, there may come a point where you have to invest in business development. You have to invest in mentors. I've done that, and it's paid off, for me. But certainly when you're starting out, budget money is tight. It's tight. More often than not, most folks who start a business, who get out there, are starting with what they have in their pocket. Most of us more often than not don't have benefactors who give them lots of money and say, okay, go forth and conquer. It's you have to figure it out using what you have. So use the free information that's out there. Seek out your teachers. You do want to learn what you need to learn so that your business can be stable and have a solid foundation and be able to grow. But you always want to have the heart of your business. And the heart starts with you, whatever your business is, but the heart starts with you. And that's what I wanted to share with this episode today. In time, again, we'll get into having more discussions about entrepreneurship from the technical side of things. I'm still very much growing. And as I grow, I will share. But I've been on my path for 6 years. I'm not as financially successful as I want to be just yet, but I'm successful by way of I'm still standing. I'm successful by way of my community has grown. I'm successful by way of having things on my vision board that are now coming to life, this podcast certainly being one of them. And for me, that's success because I'm still here. I still have a part-time job. I ultimately moved on from that organization from Baltimore, and I work with a beautiful organization. Again, that's totally aligned with the work I'm doing on my own. There's a beautiful work-life balance. There's opportunities even for me to teach yoga, with this part-time job. And so I'm still getting myself to the place where I'm completely independent, but I feel good because I feel like I'm living life according to my terms. And it starts, with your heart. It starts with your vision. And so, as I learn and as I grow and can be able to hold more discussions, more robust discussions, if you will, about how to make, how to expand your profit in 30 days, how to have this profit margin, all those different things. As I learn, as I grow, as I meet people that I hope, plan, and envision to bring on this podcast, I will share that information. But I can tell you from my experience of growing personally, of growing spiritually, of deciding to get a divorce, of moving through single motherhood, of all just the different life experiences, everything that has brought me to this space of being on this microphone and sharing my life with you has started with what I feel in my heart. As I always tell my yoga students and anybody that I work with, your heart is your internal GPS. It will tell you where to go. It will tell you when you're off course. And it's just the place that you can return to when you feel like you need a sense of direction. So if you feel like you have a passion in your heart, but you're not sure what it is just yet, take some time. That's where being quiet, taking some time to meditate, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes, in the morning, in the evening, just at a time when you can have some quiet time just to give your mind some space to see what comes up. Notice what makes your palms sweat, right? Notice what makes your heart race. Notice what makes your belly full with butterflies. Like, do you watch painting shows and that does something for you? Do you love to cook? Do you love to interior decorate? Like, think about the things that get your pulse going, and maybe it's just writing those things down. Maybe you had a dream that spoke to you, but writing those things down, journaling, having something where you can keep record and come back to for reflection and start to notice what the common theme is. If you're somebody who is in a 9-to-5 and you want to have your own business, but you're like, yeah, Rachel, your story is great. Your story is inspiring, but I'm not just going to walk out and quit my job. I always say my story is not everybody's story. My story is not everybody's story. Some people want to take their time and plan and boost their savings and, have ways that they transition from from being corporate to being on your own. But do the little things. Do your research, start to find your teachers, get your information, think about what, once you do leave, what does that business look like? So thinking is always there. Visioning, dreaming is always there, and it's for free. And so just start with listening to what's in your heart and go from there. And I promise you, you will not be led wrong. You will not be steered wrong. And in that job that I got, that first job out of graduate school, on my first day in that job, I got a call in the office that I was sitting in. Yes, I did have my own office. First job out of grad school. I always thought that was pretty cool. I didn't start off in a cubicle. Ultimately, I did, work in cubicles, but in this particular job, I started off with my own office. And so a call came to the office that I was in, and it was somebody calling for the person who previously used to, own that office space. And so I'm like, oh no, this is me and they're not here anymore. Da, 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 da. And so the person was kind enough to just say, oh, hey, you're starting there. Great. Oh, where'd you come from? And so I was like, oh, I'm just out of graduate school and this is my first job. And so this person said to me, the greatest love and the greatest reward Both require the greatest risk. Follow your heart and you'll never go wrong. And I wrote that down on a Post-it that I kept with me for the longest, the actual original Post-it. I've lost it somewhere along the way, but the words have always stayed with me. First day on my first job out of graduate school. And that all came full circle on April 30th, 2015, when I left the corporate world behind. And on May 1st, 2015, when Rachel Voss Yoga was officially born. That is the greatest risk I've ever taken. Getting a divorce kicked my ass. Being a single mom kicked my ass. You know, David and I went through some shit that kicked my ass. So, and that's my greatest love, right? And so it was even a little bit of a risk there. But as far as Rachel Voss Yoga and Find Your Free is concerned, in my life, walking away from a 6-figure income and not knowing where it's going to come from is the biggest risk I've ever taken at this stage in my life at 43 years old. But I have been so beautifully rewarded, and I know that I will continue to be rewarded because I did take that risk. I told the universe, I trust you, and the universe responded. So I always say there are some folks who have to plan and will move into business that way, or entrepreneurship, or whatever it is that way. And then there are folks like me who just have to jump and trust that the net will appear. And it will. It may seem scary. It may feel like it's a long fall, like where the hell is the net? But it will appear when you trust your heart, when you follow your heart. So I was going to say something else, but I think I'm just going to leave it at that. So, man, this was going to be another episode that I was like, it's going to be 30 minutes. But here we are, right? So let's pause there. The first in the entrepreneurship series, we'll call it. Let's pause there. Just take a moment to reflect. Maybe ground yourself if you're sitting in a chair, planting your feet on the floor, or wherever you're sitting, finding a tall spine, soft shoulders. Maybe close the eyes if that feels good. Take a nice deep breath in. Exhale out through the mouth. And for the previous 7 episodes, I shared passages from different inspirational books that I use for my life, that I use in my yoga classes. But today, I wanted to share a quote that I found when I first took my leap of faith. And it was a quote that I cut out and posted in my kitchen and posted on the wall. I just had it everywhere, so I would always be reminded of my journey and why I was doing what I was doing. And so I thought it'd be appropriate to share this quote with you today. It's not about perfect, it's about effort. And when you implement that effort into your life every single day, that's where transformation happens. That's how change occurs. Keep going. Remember why you started. And I'm going to read that one more time because I felt like I tripped over my words. It's not about perfect, it's about effort. And when you implement that effort into your life every single day, that's where transformation happens. That's how change occurs. Keep going. Remember why you started. And that's why I titled this episode of the podcast, Keep Going, Remember Why You Started. So if you weren't able to capture all those words and you're like, oh, I want that quote, just Google Keep Going, Remember Why You Started, and the quote will come up. So yeah, lovelies. And when I have those moments and I feel like I'm in the dark and I'm trying to feel my way through and I'm not sure what I'm doing and I want to give up, and I jump on LinkedIn or, what's the other one? The job search engine is completely Indeed. Like when I jump on there, like, oh, I'm just going to go back to work and, I'm just going to do that. I pause and I'm like, why did you start this? What was it that you wanted to do? And again, even though it wasn't a yoga studio I was working towards or like a big wellness, like, even though there wasn't like this tangible end game, I just knew why I started was to be of service to others, to follow my heart, to create a life that my son could be proud of and that he could be an example he could live by. Because I don't want my son and my future children to feel like they have to think and do things one way. I want them to have the mental freedom to know I can do what I want to do. It doesn't just have to look one way. And so how I chose to live my life would be the example that I set for my son and my future children. So when my back gets against the wall, when I feel a little dark, when I feel scared, when I feel like, what the fuck, I pause and I tell myself, keep going. Remember why you started. And so I offer that to you. Keep going. Keep following your heart. Remember why you started. So with that, lovelies, let's go ahead and bring this podcast to an end by saying what I always say, which is, may you be happy, may you be free, may you be peaceful, easeful, useful, and joyful. The light in me honors the light in each of you. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you next week.